Welcome to this week's Financial Flash Report. I'm Susan Stiles, and today I asked John Stone, who is our Senior Wealth Advisor here at Stiles Financial Services, to have a little chat with me about estate planning, and in particular about the talk, John. And the talk is, when should a family discuss their estate planning and how assets will be passed on to the next generation? And I know you've engaged in a lot of these conversations over the years, as I have as well. And I just kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit and get some of your thoughts around that, and maybe give some of our viewers some ideas on what to think about and how to go about making what can be kind of an emotional, right, driven decision.
Well, glad to join today, Susan. And the talk is really important. And this talks about money. And as Susan mentioned, as you mentioned, it's essentially the conversation with adult children, maybe even adult grandchildren, depending, on family wealth, on the family estate plan,
right, and
on what happens next, which means the estate transfer or the wealth transfer from one generation to the next. And, it's a timely subject, in particular, because right now we've all heard, or maybe have heard, about the great wealth transfer that we're in the midst of. And essentially that refers to intergenerational transfer of accumulated wealth, mostly from baby boomers to their heirs over the next 20 so years. And the estimated value of the assets to be transferred exceeds about $100 trillion over that 20-year period.
Yeah, we're talking trillions.
Yeah,
with a T.
Pretty soon it's real money, exactly. And that transfer requires a lot of planning.
Yes.
And what we find in our relationships and how we work with our clients is also supported by research, which tells us that while a lot of the technical planning and work is being done to meet objectives for families and so on, the communication among families isn't really happening. Okay? So that's really the crux of what I think we're talking about today.
And so why, John? What keeps families from disclosing to their children what their net worth is, how much money they have, where it is, and what your intent is on how you're going to pass it on, and whether you are going to. So, Ted Turner just passed away, all right? But what I read about Ted, and he had an estate of somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.8 billion, he had told his children a while back that he had signed the giving pledge, all right? So he made that very clear, and we know some other notable, very wealthy individuals in the U.S. and around the world that have also signed that giving pledge. What about the rest of us that aren't multi-billionaires? And what's the meaningful way that they should be having that conversation, and when?
As far as, why not? Why aren't these conversations happening? Well, I mean, is it because families don't care? Not likely. In fact, it may very well be because of the exact opposite, because they do care so much. And, it's not necessarily solely a financial or money conversation. It's emotional. And it can be even more emotional when we're talking about transfer of wealth, right? So part of the reason the conversation isn't happening might be because there's a fear of creating drama or tension, or how that message is going to be received.
And it depends on what the family dynamics are. Today, when you're looking at a divorce rate of over 50% in our country, there's a lot of blended families. And that just adds to the complexity of how money gets transferred and to who.
That's very true. Very true.
And I've talked to a lot of families and a lot of clients that think that once they pass, their children will get along. And the reality of it is that really doesn't happen. I've seen it all too often where the children, the heirs, have different motives. They even may be in different socioeconomic places with each other, different goals, and they just simply don't get along. So the tighter the planning is, the better from that perspective.
Sure.
On the other hand, when there isn't a lot of flexibility, right, then that can also be challenging when other issues unexpectedly might come up.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example, because we've been talking about this today. Let's say you have a trust, and the trust goes into an irrevocable trust upon your passing, and your 3 children have equal shares of that trust. And you selected a corporate trustee for that trust. What if down the road, long after you're gone, the corporate trustee, for whatever reason, isn't really working out real well? And if your trust document doesn't afford the flexibility to make changes with that corporate trustee, that's very problematic.
Sure. And as you said, expectations, right? And if, only the donors, grantors,
Right.
the patriarch, matriarch of the family are aware of these things.
Right.
That's a heck of a thing to get sprung on other family
Right.
members. And to your point, Susan, you make such a great point about some challenging dynamics that exist in so many families, right?
That's right.
And, the lack of clarity and perhaps alignment can sometimes make challenging scenarios even more challenging, despite the wealth that might be coming along with it. I think what we run into sometimes specifically in those scenarios are situations where maybe a parent is unsure as to how to start the conversation and with whom.
Right.
Because of fear of offending. What is the hierarchy
Right.
that they need to work through? Equally, children may just sit back even though they have concerns or questions because they feel it's not their place.
Right.
And valid, right? Valid
Right.
emotions, valid feelings. I mean, that's being polite. So, it's a tough thing. But to your point, the consequences and the challenges that can be created by the lack of clarity can maybe be even worse. And I think in addition to maybe those more prevalent scenarios,
Right.
I think you also have folks that just look at it maybe as a privacy and security issue, right? Disclosing a lot of information like that,
That's right.
maybe not because they mistrust their children or their family,
Or maybe
but
they
who
do
else?
mistrust their
Or
children.
maybe they do.
Oh no, there are situations where you've got 1 child or 2, and maybe you do mistrust their
Perhaps.
intentions.
Exactly.
I've seen a trust that was written up where they had very specific guidelines for each of the children beneficiaries, and one that comes to mind where one of the sons had a history of gambling. And so this parent did not want to leave all this money to an individual that may gamble it away. So there were guidelines very specific in the trust around that, where
Sure.
you're actually controlling things from the grave.
Yeah.
And that is what trusts are good for.
Yeah.
But again, to create a trust takes pre-planning.
Sure, and what you just described, that scenario, there's an example where a parent might be a little uncomfortable having to have a conversation with certain of the kids and saying,
Right.
"Hey, you guys we trust, you not so much."
Right.
That's hard because you love them anyway, right?
Yeah.
And it's now
Maybe.
perhaps, and then there's another piece of this equation that, or another piece that comes into the equation, where there's a control factor, right?
Right.
So there's been a decision maker or makers that have really been running a family for decades, right?
Right.
All their life, in fact. And all of a sudden now we're going to kind of, farm this out to family members. It's hard. And, it's worked with us controlling it for a long time. Why can't it just keep on going? And so I think that's a piece of it as well.
But the blended family gets complicated.
For sure.
Especially when you've got a little bit of a disparity of net worth between the husband and wife. And then how does it get, split between their respective children? And that really takes conversation.
It does.
And the husband and wife really need to be aligned on that particular topic.
Yeah,
they really do.
I think presenting a solid front as
That's
parents
right.
learn early
Right.
makes sense in this scenario as well. And I think so, we're describing some situations, the why perhaps
Sure.
this conversation doesn't happen. And you're giving some great examples as to, what might reinforce someone's
Right.
reticence to talk about this kind of thing.
Sure.
But there are really significant consequences that come with missing these opportunities,
Right.
and these are sometimes substantial economic consequences. And I think what we run into when there isn't alignment across the generations.
Sure.
Because we can plan as to how things are going to happen, but guess what? We don't get to control when it might happen.
Sure.
Right? We think we do. We hope
Sure.
we do. We might not have that control though. So one of the problems that arises when we're not aligned is that decisions sometimes get made in a reactive mode versus an
Right.
intentional mode. Maybe that's not the best decision for the overall family objectives. Similar to that, we find that when decisions are made under pressure,
Sure.
they maybe aren't strategically aligned with what has been planned out for so many years and or decades.
Well, and it can be costly.
Absolutely.
Loss of growth in the estate,
Yeah.
taxes in the estate.
Oh, yeah.
How's about lost accounts?
Oh, yeah.
Or if you don't know that a life insurance policy exists, you could never submit the claim, and it becomes another unclaimed asset.
Exactly.
And in our country, we have billions of dollars in unclaimed assets.
Yeah, I do. And with 100+ trillion expected to change
Right.
hands, if you will, over the next 20 years, we can expect that number's going up, right?
That I would expect that
Yeah,
to be the
and
case.
so that becomes a real challenge for planning.
Yes, it
right?
does.
Not having that cohesive, comprehensive plan for which all assets are accounted and in the right place
Yep.
can present challenges.
And I've seen this manifest where there's an unexpected death, and trying to find those assets, it can take a couple of years,
Yeah.
and you may not even find them all.
Yeah.
I've seen that happen. Additionally, what if you end up with some cognitive decline? As we age, we have cognitive
Yeah.
decline,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
can't remember where all those assets are. So the reality of it is, where you're trying to de-risk by spreading your assets around. You think that's diversifying. The reality of it is, you're doing the opposite.
Yeah,
You're
agreed.
actually increasing risk
Yeah.
across the board
Yeah.
with your estate. Not to mention the fact that there isn't a cohesive approach around managing those assets. So you end up with overlap, underlap, and you really don't have a cohesive goal or strategy.
Tax bills, which
Sure.
which come of perhaps not having liquidity to take
Yep.
care of estate taxes and such at the time that the donors
Exactly.
or the patriarch or matriarch
That's a big
pass away.
deal.
There are some pretty glaring examples of that in recent history about families that had to go into fire sale mode just to pay
Yes.
the tax on the
Yes.
estate. Maybe not as drastic as those dollars and cents, but oftentimes business owner operators,
Right.
families who've run a business their whole life, and the children benefited and were right there with their
Right.
family, but maybe weren't part of the business.
Sure.
And aren't necessarily in a position to be successors.
Right.
If that's not fleshed out in full prior to some transaction or transition event down the road, that can really be one of these under pressure sets of decisions that need to be made, that can be quite costly.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's tie this up with a few takeaways. Number one, if you're married or you have a significant other, you should first talk about it between the two of you.
Of course.
In some cases, a spouse may not want to be as forthcoming in getting their affairs in order. That should not stop the other spouse.
Of course.
Okay? Each spouse can have their own will, their own designations
Sure.
around how they want their assets to be passed on. So don't let that stop you. That's number one. Number two, try to be aligned with your spouse on how you do want
sure.
those assets divvied up. You don't have to be, but at least know what each other wants to do, so that there's somewhat of a united front when it comes to your heirs. Every family dynamic is a little different in how and when and who you share your estate with. And trust is a big issue. It's really a good idea to work with a professional advisor and to bring professionals like ourselves in, and certainly work with an attorney. We do see a lot of different types of situations, and we can share I don't want to call it war stories, but we can share a lot of our experience
Sure.
with you and help you process through what to think about and what works best.
Sure.
Not everybody wants to leave a legacy. Not everybody, we have clients that come in and say, I want to spend it all, right? Then that's a process that has to be managed too,
It's
in
a
and of
plan.
itself.
It's a plan for sure. And these are great points, Susan. I think if we also want to, maybe include some of the things that we advise on with our clients, as you mentioned already, working with your partners and trusted advisors, attorneys, CPAs, wealth advisors, as far as steps that we might provide guidance on.
Right.
You can approach it gradually.
Right.
You don't have to open up the books, if you will, to the entire family all at once. It can be a gradual, incremental set of steps. And I think once you've got the ice broken, now we're talking about involving people in the process.
That's right.
Not just informing them, but now involve them in some of the steps or maybe some of the responsibilities that are going to be required down the road. In addition to that, I think just understanding that for a lot of family members, as they hear these messages, it's going to be emotional.
Right.
It's not cut and dry. It's not just dollars and cents. So be patient and work with those folks. And I think understand your roles, right? As the parent generation, I guess we could say. The role is shifting a little bit. You're moving from the control person to someone that's focused on the stewardship of this entity, the estate, for everybody. And from the perspective of the next generation, they're no longer just beneficiaries. Now they're stakeholders. Okay, everybody's got a stake in what happens to this estate.
And it's not just about money and how assets are being divided and passed on, but in some cases, some families have children that need guardians that have special needs.
Absolutely.
And then you for sure want to have that set up in advance as well to ensure the safety and the continuity of your child that may be under your domain, and ensure that child, even as an adult, can be cared for upon your absence.
Such a great point, Susan. And this is something that we speak with clients about.
That's right.
Oftentimes, which is, we are so focused on the dollars and cents and doing all we can to take care, nurture, grow, be stewards of these funds and assets that have been accumulated over lifetimes, right? But your point is that there's a human factor that's always involved, and having people part of that conversation and in that equation probably helps more than it doesn't. Okay.
Well, thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Susan.
I knew you'd have a lot of really good thoughts around this.
Well, I wish we didn't have to talk about this thing, but it's a fact of life, if you will. And
planning is important.
We got to plan for it, and it's a moving target. We're planning for things, and we can never stop planning.
That's right.
Right. So again, thank you for having me in the conversation.
All right.
Great.
Educational content by the professionals at Stiles Financial Services, delivering customized portfolios aligned to your unique wealth goals.
Should we do another take, or are we good?